Hi, I'm Hrvoje and this is Puzzle Blocks. I will go through some basic Blender tools and operations that are mentioned in the pill bottle tutorial, and hope this supplementary tutorial helps make your first steps easier. Let's go. I'm starting with a default Blender scene. I'll delete the camera and the light and keep the cube for now. Depending on what we're doing in Blender, we need different windows or different tools visible. For example, if I'm animating, I might need the timeline larger. If I'm doing shading, I might need a shader editor. But if I want to keep the viewport, the timeline and the shader editor, I will click in one of these corners, hold and pull to the left. Now I pulled out a new window. I can change it from the viewport into a shader editor. And then I might also need a UV editor. Then I will split this one and change one of them into a UV editor. This window setup is how I mostly work. To close them, if you need more space, just click on one that's open, same thing in the corner, and pull it towards another open window. UV editor, shader editor. When we add new objects, initially they have some options that are available only when we add them. So let's delete the cube and add in UV sphere. You can see here I have some extra options that allow me to adjust this sphere initially, but once I click somewhere else, these options are gone, and this is what I have now. If I want to bring back those extra options, I need to add in a new sphere. These options are available again. And then once I'm happy with everything, I can go on. There are two main modes when working in Blender. They're called the object mode and the edit mode. In object mode, we move entire objects. Let's Shift D and make another sphere. In object mode, I move them in relation to one another, but if I want to go to edit mode and edit one of these two meshes, I will select one, hit tab, and now I can adjust the geometry of the mesh separately. Now this is what this object looks like. We've edited it in edit mode. In object mode, we can scale it, but we can't change the shape of it. If I bring out this side panel and go to Item, I can see some parameters of my object. For example, if I scale this object in object mode, we can see both the dimensions and the scale is changing. But if I go into edit mode and scale it, I'm not scaling the whole object, just the mesh. So if I tap out of edit mode, I can see my scale is still 1, but the dimensions decreased in size. Scaling in object mode changes the scale, while scaling in edit mode keeps the scale same. It's just something to remember. We'll discuss why it's important later on. If I want to make fine adjustments, while scaling for example, I can hit S and pull my mouse left and right. But if I want to make smaller increments, I can hold down Shift, and now I'm fine adjusting the scale or size. Regular scaling, scaling with Shift, much smaller increments. There are multiple ways of selecting two or more objects. Let's make another one. Select this and Shift D. I will go into Viewport Shading, select Matte Cap, Color Random, and check this cavity option. So now I can see I have multiple objects, and if I want to select more of them, I can either hold down Shift, click on each of them once, and have them all selected. Alternatively, I can hit B, click, drag, and select all of them like this. So Shift to select more. In edit mode, Holding down Shift and clicking on different vertices selects separate vertices, same as you select objects in object mode. Another thing we can do in edit mode is hold down Control, select one vertice, hold down Control, and then click on one somewhere, and the shortest path will be selected. So each vertice on the path to the next one will be selected. This works in any direction. It might not be predictable. Sometimes you might need to make smaller steps or smaller increments to select the vertices you want selected if you want a specific path. Alt-A to deselect everything. Tab to tap out of edit mode. With Ctrl-I, we select inverse. So for example, if I want to select everything but this object, I can do it like this, or I can select just this one and hit Ctrl-I. Select inverse. This works in object mode as well as in edit mode. So if I want all of the vertices selected except this one, I'll select this one, Ctrl-I, and now we select inverse. We can move or rotate objects in Blender in different ways. Let's turn on the move gizmo and the rotate gizmo. I don't really use the rotate gizmo, but the move gizmo is often quite useful, as it always shows us the orientation of the object. So if I select it, hit R, and rotate it, the arrows are showing the world orientation, because we have global selected. If I select normal, now we're seeing the object's normal directions. If I hit Alt-R, I reset the rotation. Alt-G, this resets the location. So we can see both the location and rotation are now at 0. I can move an object by hitting G and one of the axes, GY, GX, GZ. Since we turned on this move gizmo, I can pull it like this. And always we can right-click to cancel the operation we started. It just snaps back to its original place by right-clicking. Another way I can move this object is by clicking here, dragging left and right, same as for Y. Or I can simply write the number here and hit enter. So there are different ways in which you can move objects. Same goes for rotation. I always find this rotate gizmo confusing, so I'll just turn it off. If we do something we don't like, we can always Ctrl Z to undo it. Ctrl Z is undo. If you go to Edit, Preferences, System, you can choose how many undo steps you want to be available. More steps means more memory is used. I mostly find 32 steps to be enough. When copying and pasting values in Blender, you don't need to select the number, you can just hover above it. So for example, if I have the location set at 2 on X and I want it set to 2 on Y, I can just hover my mouse above X, I don't have to click, hit Ctrl C, and then hover above Y and hit Ctrl V. Now you can't paste meters into degrees because it's not an expected number, and also you can't paste degrees into scale. And you can do some basic math functions in Blender also in any numerical fields. So for example, if I want to go to frame 10, I can add 9 to 1, 1 plus 9, and then I'm on frame 10. If I want to change the end frame to 100, I can just type -150. Sometimes this is quite useful. Some basic shading options in Blender: select this sphere, go to Material, hit New, and we can zoom in on this principled BSDF. The principled BSDF node is actually a complex material shader which gives you many parameters for your material. For example, base color, roughness, meaning how reflective it is, Is it metal or not? If it's transparent or not. Another thing we have is this coat option, which if added, adds another layer of gloss or roughness, which can be used for some nice effects. Let's move this sphere to the side and add in a cube. In Blender, it is possible to work with different kinds of materials. We can have the entire object have the same color and the same parameters. Another thing we can do is project image textures onto 3D objects. And this is done using UVs. So UVs are 2D maps that we lay over objects. So let's create a new material for this to see what it is. Hit Shift A, search and write CHE and get this checker texture. Put it there, drag this color into base color. Click here and hit Ctrl T. If this doesn't work, you need to go into Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and install Node Wrangler. The Node Wrangler add-on is in Blender by default, but it's not turned on by default. So you will need to go to Add-ons and just check it there. Then select a node, which is an image or an image texture, Ctrl T, and you get this texture coordinate and mapping node. Here we can see a difference between a generated and a UV coordinate. For example, if I connect this UV to the vector, click here, go into edit mode, select all, with A, hit U and go to Smart UV Project. Unwrap. Now each of these rectangles here represents one of our cube's sides. So by scaling this, we scale each image separately. Alternatively, I can, if you hit here, check these arrows, choose Face Select Mode, then we can adjust each one separately. I can also select it here since we checked these arrows and then scale it here. So this gives you an idea of how it works. In the pill bottle tutorial, we'll be mapping an image texture to our bottle and box, so it will make more sense. On the other hand, if I connect generated into vector, scaling these UVs now does nothing. Now I can change the scale here. If I want to change all of the axes at the same time, I can Shift A, add a value node, connect it here to scale, and now we're using the same number for X, Y, and Z. Sometimes when working with objects in Blender, you can end up with normals facing the wrong way, meaning that each plane has two sides, and the normals should always be facing away from the object. One way to check this is to click here and go into Face Orientation, and whatever we see is blue is correct. If we ever end up with an object whose materials are behaving strangely or we're getting weird textures, we can always go into Face Orientation and check. I'll hit Ctrl-Shift-N to turn these normals inside out, meaning that the inside of the box is facing outwards. This would be considered wrong. If this ever happens, go into Edit Mode, select All with A and hit Shift-N. Everything should be blue. On the other hand, if we delete just one of these faces, you can see the inside is red. This happens because theoretically we can't have an object with an infinitely thin side. So to fix this and add some thickness to this, we can go to Edit Mode, select all, Extrude Scale, Shift Z, and add some thickness to this. Pull this one there. So this might not make sense now, but that's how you can fix this. We can't have an object which has no thickness. This cube has its origin point in its center. And right now, the origin point of this cube is located at the origin point of our scene. Where all the axes meet and all the dimensions are at 0 point here. The red and white circle we see here, that is our 3D cursor. We can place this 3D cursor anywhere, but by default it is placed at the world origin point. By holding down Shift and right-clicking, I can move this cursor around. And this is a very useful tool when we need to place objects somewhere precisely. So for example, let's say I want to place the corner of this cube on the corner of this one here. Now there are a few different steps I can take to do this, but I'll show you quickly. The more you use all of these options, the more it will make sense. So let's do this. Go into edit mode, go to vertex selection mode, select this vertex here. While in edit mode, hit Shift S, go to cursor to selected, tap out of edit mode, right click, set origin to 3D cursor. So now the origin of this cube is on this corner here. You can see if we rotate it, now we're rotating around this point. Now this corner is the pivot point. Select this one, edit mode, select this vertex, Shift S, cursor to selected. Now we place the cursor there precisely. Go back to this one, Shift S, selection to cursor. So since our origin point of this cube was placed on the corner, then we added the 3D cursor to the corner of the other cube, we can move them around precisely. Now let's say I want to rotate both of these around the 3D cursor. Then I would go to pivot point, 3D cursor, select both of them, hit R, Z, and we're rotating along this line. Now if I want to place this cube onto the origin point, I can select it, origin to geometry, which brings the origin point of this cube to its center. But we're still rotating around the 3D cursor, so set pivot point to median point. That's good. Now Shift S, cursor to world origin. Select this object, Shift S, selection to cursor. This might seem a bit confusing right now, but the more you use it, the more it will make sense. Some things you need to remember is that the 3D cursor helps us define points, and the origin point of each object is where it is placed if we move it somewhere. So if I put the 3D cursor there, Shift S, selection to cursor, it placed the center of the cube onto the 3D cursor. Shift S, cursor to world origin, Shift S, selection to cursor. Hit A to select everything, hit B, hold down the scroll, pull it over these two, which deselects them, and hit X to delete everything except these two cubes. Sometimes we want to control one object with another. This is called parenting. So let's say I want to control this hollow cube with the one in the center. I'll select this one first, hold down Shift, select the other one, hit Ctrl P, object, keep transform. Now I want to control it, but I want it to remain where it is right now. So now by selecting this one and rotating, you can see I'm rotating both of them. G, the hollow cube follows the one in the center, whatever we do with it. Moving, rotating, but also scaling. One thing that happened is that in our outliner, now we see only one cube. Since we parented the hollow cube, it kind of went into the other one. So there's a drop-down menu. That's the hollow one. If we want to adjust it separately now, we need to select it either here or here. Adjust it, but whatever we do to the one in the center happens to the other one too. If I want to unparent it, select it, space, right, clear, parent, clear, and keep transformation. So now the parenting is cleared, and you can see we see both our cubes here again. There are different ways of adjusting geometry of each object in Blender, and there's a clear distinction between destructive and non-destructive modeling. What this means is, for example, the changes that we made to this cube are destructive, meaning we destroyed its original shape and created something different. This is not a huge problem for an object like this, because I can just delete this, delete that, add in another face there, and now we have our original cube. But if we play around with a UV sphere, for example, let's turn off face orientation now. Let's say I delete all these vertices here. Now, fixing this is not that easy. I would need a lot of adjusting to get the original shape back. But these here are modifiers. Modeling with modifiers is a non-destructive way of working, meaning that we don't really change the original shape of our mesh. Let me show you. Let's add a subdivision surface modifier to our cube. You can see we added a lot of geometry. You can see we added some fake geometry to the cube. And the more I increase the level, the more geometry I can see on our object. But if I go into edit mode, we can see we still have only 8 vertices. If I get rid of this subdivision modifier, I can just hide it. Our cube is still in its original shape. Let's add a bevel. A bevel edits the edges or the sharpness of the edges, and I want to show you this and how it affects. One thing we need to remember here is that the order in which we add the modifiers has different outcomes for the mesh. So if I put the bevel above the subdivision, you can see we get totally different shapes. Let's do something here. Let's delete this face again, so I can show you some of the modifiers I use mostly. Let's add a mirror modifier. The mirror modifier is very useful when modeling things which are symmetrical. So let's select the mirror object for this one. Make sure we're mirroring along the y-axis, not the x. That's the y. You can hide this here. Add a solidify. This adds some thickness. Then add a bevel. And add a subdivision surface. Go into edit mode, CTRL R, and let's add some loop cuts here to see what's happening. So whatever we do on one side happens on the other. Certain tools or operations that I use frequently and use many times, I might not mention, but make sure you're keeping an eye on the buttons I'm pressing here. That's it for now. I hope this helps you with the pill tutorial, and you can always come back here if you forget any of this. Good luck with the tutorial. If you found any of this useful, please like and subscribe.